Hey there, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the How to Save the World podcast, where we take a deep dive into how to influence human behavior to save the planet. And sometimes we get to look into some fun and interesting technology that can help us do that. I'm your host, Katie Patrick, environmental engineer and designer. In this episode, we'll be talking with a really cool person I think has worked on one of the most interesting Fitbit for the planet style of technology projects. Her name is Naomi Augustine Yee, and she worked for Magic Leap. If you're not familiar with Magic Leap, they are those headsets where you can see a visualization of augmented reality superimposed over the real world. This kind of AR can be used for some really interesting stuff. Naomi has been actually building a real-time digital twin of the city of Los Angeles. That means you can put on a Magic Leap headset and see LA in 3D or even 4D if you take into the dimension of time, and see the real flows of data as they are happening, like air pollution, traffic, kilowatt hours of electricity consumed, water use, all as if you were looking at the city on a boardroom table. I've tried a Magic Leap headset out, and they are actually pretty magical. We can use AR to create these digital twins, but we can also use it to create an immersive experience of an alternative world. We can use it to visualize what a better, eco-friendly, futuristic world could look like, and do it in a way that is much more salient, powerful, inspiring, and impactful than just a regular 2D picture is. And there's evidence out there now proving that eco-imagination exercises like this really do lead to pro-environmental action. And in my opinion, this type of thinking will lead to the kind of epic innovation that we need to make this biophilic ecotopia dream come true. You can also check out the blog article on my Medium page to see the pictures that she's created of these visualizations. It's quite wonderful. This interview was recorded during our Fitbit for the Planet video meetups, where we got to hear Naomi's insights on how we can use this nascent and novel technology to really change the world. Thanks for joining us today, Naomi. I'm so excited to hear more about what you've been working on.
I'm currently leading innovation for spatial computing, which is the more generalized term for augmented reality. I prefer it because it describes a new way of doing computing and interacting with digital informations. Just like much of what I do in my role is research and prototype future use cases and scenarios beyond wearing the goggles. I do have the goggles next to me. I know it's only one, I don't have 17. Like one of
They're a little hard to come by, so you got to show them off because they're really expensive and hardly anybody owns them.
Yeah, so I have the one. I'm trying to look 5-10 years into the future. It's not really about the glasses anymore at that point. It's kind of deployed all around us. It's more platform scale, which is why I got involved in this whole spatial computing for smart cities thing. I had spent most of 2018 researching city-scaled applications of spatial computing and what that could look like when it's integrating with other emerging technologies like 5G, AI, IoT sensors, autonomous vehicles, and so on. What you get is this spatial layer that integrates many industries together in sectors like across transportation, urban planning, education, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, entertainment, on and on. So we're calling it the spatial web.
That's cool. I'm going to write that in the notes, the spatial web.
So yeah, I'm kind of spearheading applications of spatial computing for smart cities, which is a natural segue into sustainability, helping cities design more sustainable solutions for their cities, and of course, climate action. They're all very related. So, when you're looking at something so large scale like cities or even connecting cities together across the planet, where do you start? So first of all, we were meeting quite a bit with several government entities, getting an idea of what would aid them in city planning and management. So those are things like being able to design and test urban planning ideas without spending a lot of money on construction. That was really important. Like deciding on the best road or building designs when taking into consideration things like traffic flow, pollution reduction, and severe weather scenarios. So we started by drawing a series of storyboard use cases. In this picture, the black and white drawn people are supposed to be physical representations of people, and then these colored in people are supposed to be volumetrically streamed people coming in from like different locations. So that's kind of the vision of the future we had in mind, is that we had people from all over the world working together on a problem. So you can kind of cut out and reduce the need for travel. So there's two examples. There's kind of like this indoor office space scenario where people are looking at their digital copy of a city. And then there's the outdoor one where you actually take what you've designed and modeled out, and then you take it outside, and then you can run simulations.
Oh, you've got the dragonfly. You've got all my favorite eco buildings. I recognize every single one.
Yeah, the green spaces shapes, right?
Yeah, Vincent Caliber all the way.
Of course, you got to have a whale. When you're not doing work, you can turn on the whimsy layer and go
Wait,
outside.
so this is like you would be able to walk outside and see this? Like if I went into like a field, is that what this view is?
Yeah, that's kind of the more long-term vision of this. It's not too far off, though, I think, because the tabletop one's obviously easy to do right now because we can do indoor prototyping with Magic Leap, but I think outdoor is going to come very soon. What you can do is you can go to a place that has IoT sensors that have collecting data from its environment, and then you can actually create some content to project into the physical space. So you can do that with pollution or even like a little new construction city building that you want to add later. And going down the storyboard, we actually converted some of these into high-res imagery. This one would be explaining how much heat is dissipating from a building, how much energy is being wasted, and then disaster scenario prototyping, like hurricanes if you live in Florida, flooding, strong wind. There's possibilities are endless.
So you could have like a whole lot of thermal sensors around the building and then be able to put that in a 3D Magic Leap experience.
Yeah, so you can kind of, we've envisioned a smart cities tool that one could use in the office setting by making like a miniature digital twin of your city. So you can use it as a sandbox. You can make a digital replica of the city, feed it with as much real data as possible, then it'll allow you to run simulations, edit, and even monitor the health of your city. So obviously the place to start was, get the indoor one working, right? Make a miniature copy of. So we initially made this for urban planning partner as an example. We took real data snapshots to start, and we started updating this last year with live data feeds. So this one shows off aviation paths and population. This is the globe level, and we're going to zoom in to the digital twin of Los Angeles. I'm in Los Angeles, and the development studio that we partnered with is also Los Angeles based.
So just with that Earth thing, is that the Earth model? Is the idea that you would, in theory, be able to just zoom anywhere on the Earth and you would have this kind of digital twin of the Earth cities kind of everywhere, and anyone could just go in and see it?
Yeah, one city at a time. So this is something we did in 2018. Obviously, the next step would be model all and even non-urbanized areas like forests, glaciers, bodies of water, oceans. And then we have a second video. We actually updated the one you just saw. There's some minor differences. It's mostly visual. In the other one, we use game-like assets for buildings. And then in this one, we made them more photorealistic. The street data layout is coming from Mapbox. And then the city data itself is coming from several different sources of open data providers like World Bank. World Bank provides tons of data. And another reason why we picked LA is because there were lots of options for data to use. This was built by both an external development studio and also an in-house. So there's some nice looking building models. They did lighting and texture work on here. There's like a game-like UI system with interaction paradigms that feels good to the users. So it's very content development based.
I was just looking into Cesium, like a JavaScript framework for 3-dimensional buildings. Do they use that? It's where you can kind of get photographs. I bet there's a lot of different providers of those photographic buildings. Did the game studio make the artwork of the buildings themselves?
Yeah, like they just looked at photographs of the actual buildings and just like hand painted everything.
All right, they didn't, because there's other stuff out there, but it doesn't look quite as good as that. It's just a little bit clunkier.
We think it's important to make it very visually appealing and compelling. I think that's kind of part of the solution, right? Instead of, it's two parts. It's bringing invisible data and bringing transparency to invisible data, and then there's like making it compelling so people want to use it. and wants to use the tool over something else. I think spatial computing could accelerate that effort. I think invisible information is more visible. It can help city planners choose more efficient solutions, to hopefully choose like better designs to minimize waste and pollution. I think it's more compelling than like staring at a bazillion BIM files or charts. It can get ridiculously powerful when you go planet scale, and you can twin everything and maybe even run sims to predict and prevent stuff like the Australia fires. At least that's my hope, and what I tell myself in order to get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, and did they build it on in Unity? Is Unity strong enough? It's not too
Unity
complex
is
for
very
Unity?
strong. Yeah, it's our top choice. It's very easy to use, and it integrates with lots of other third-party tools.
So between like basically Unity and Mapbox, anybody could start doing something like this?
I think so, yeah. And it doesn't have to look like a AAA game, right? You can easily get the data in there and just make it. I think digital twins with real data is great for shedding light, but I think transparency could come in many forms, just beyond visualizing things like CO2 in the air. But you can visualize things like social economic data or inequality data. I think that's going to be something we're going to look at this year.
And what do you notice, like the difference between, one of like the first questions I ask people on the podcast is like, what is the gap in the world that is like, why is the world kind of bad without this idea? So in how to ask that question for this context is, what have you noticed is the difference between people seeing like a simple two-dimensional infographic, like a chart of data, like we've all seen the CO2 going up. It's a little bit resonant, you're like, oh, charts going up, that's bad, compared to some of these magic leap experiences when people are wearing glasses and they'll be able to see these three-dimensional models. The whole idea is that if we're trying to change the world, is that once it's kind of like magic leapified, it's far more compelling than before. Like, what have you noticed the difference between people having these more immersive experiences, how much more it compels them?
Yeah, I think you touched on it a little bit. We started working closely with the United Nations Development Program last year, and then we're going into like a full year 2020 program this year. Super excited about that. Its problems are like decision making happening with limited information. I know this is always going to be a problem no matter what time period of humanity we're talking about here, but there's always room for improvement, especially decision making without bias. Ability for people to understand different perspectives. When you take the invisible data and you make compelling spatial content that you can like see and touch and interact with, I think it triggers something in the brain, some different kind of empathy that charts and graphs can't give you anymore. And I confirmed this while speaking to folks working in the United Nations, that they're going to need something more high impact than a lot of graphs. I think we need something that's going to really change the mind of policymakers and bringing content directly into their faces. So that's, I think, what this is going to bring to the table. At least I hope that it will. Another thought I had was the game design aspect of it. I love that you have a game design background too, because I think that's going to be one of the key variables that's going to go into a lot of this.
I mean, I just read books. I didn't really even like have a job or anything. I'm just kind of like self-appointed enthusiast.
I mean, I worked in the game industry, but I didn't actually make the game itself. I was like all back-end tools and automation and deployment pipelines and stuff. That's where the real fun is, guys, by the way.
Yeah. Well, that's where the technology is where it gets real,
Games are compelling because it rewards people for actions, and it gives them a feeling of satisfaction for having the power to cause something to change. It's a lot easier to succeed and make an impact in the game world than the real world, and that's why I think a lot of people are drawn to it. We should definitely take these game systems and bring them into applications like this. It's so much easier to hit goals that way, like we do in games.
I'm so fascinated by this concept of the progress bar. Like, it sounds like so
I love progress bars, man.
Like the progress bar that you have basically a beginning and an end. And if you could sum all of my book down to one thing, it's basically about a progress bar. It's like saying you need a measurable beginning and you need a measurable end, and then you need to track your progress along something that you want to change. And just see so many people who are trying to like change the world or whatever, just not having that at all. They're just like, we're trying to, create awareness or do this or sell a shop selling eco products. And then I just think once you can bring that into, that's like game thing, into these type of experiences, you can be like, yeah, let's like get to the end of the progress bar for like ending deforestation or no more plastic or whatever, and can get excited about it.
Yeah, you said earlier that you found that money wasn't enough of a motivation. What do you think the motivation would be? Is it the progress bar thing, like being rewarded for hitting goals and stuff, right?
Well, it's kind of, well, I mean, I don't know like all the things, but I'm just trying to work them out. People, you know what you mentioned about getting a reward, you know, like the brain has this reward center, and it's a reward based, our brains are focused on craving rewards. If it's like love or attention or food, warmth, all the things that we want all the time, and we're constantly craving rewards. So the more that you can build that into a system, like if it can be like, you know, a character, like something that's game-ish, the progress bar gets to a section and then you give a reward, which is like, oh, good job, or it's like a color or something. The more that you can feed the reward center of the brain, the more traction the project will have. And it can be done in a very simple way. But I think all of the whole theory behind the game design is just, how do we bring rewards to people for doing the things we want them to do?
I think 2020, we're going to focus on something called the impact simulation tool, the dynamic and reactive cousin of the prototype video I showed. It's showing positive results that come from actions performed by individuals or even policymakers. I think we're going to target policymakers in particular to try to make the most impact as possible. But if you make a change to a policy and then you run the simulation on your digital twin, then that's more fun and rewarding, right? Because it's not so meaningful anymore to make a sim of like sea levels rising and glaciers receding. Like we've seen it 100 times already. It's boring now. Like it's much more meaningful to see sims of actions turning into results. So spatial computing impact simulation tool for indoor and outdoor.
Yeah, I see. So moving to modeling the results of actions rather than just kind of dystopian future scenarios. Like, oh, like when you do this, like the sort of cause and effect of people's individual actions, or maybe bigger, maybe not individual, maybe city actions as well.
Or using like leveraging the spatial experience creation aspect to create like a future that is a desirable future that you want to live there, right? And that's also can help with motivation, I think. Keep being optimistic the whole time. It gets hard sometimes, but
yeah, I think the more, it's just so critical to have this very clear optimistic vision of the future so you can work towards it, and your imagination is in there all the time. You know, you're like, well, how would I get that happen if I really wanted everything to have green walls on it? Like, how would I make it happen? You're constantly like, how would I make it happen? That kind of engineering brain is always going. Whereas if you're just thinking of doom all the time, like you're not coming up with any ideas. It's just like, oh, everything's, you know, terrible. That's a really good premise for this other concept I like to explore, which is like, how do you see Magic Leap playing a role? Like, what role is it going to play? I mean, we've already answered it with those beautiful images you already had of all the Vincent Calabert green buildings. But I mean, how would you see like the utopian future when the world has like gotten better? I mean, what would Magic Leap be playing in that? How would it be sort of part of society and part of building incredible eco cities where everything works?
Yeah. I wish I had prepared more art because I have like a library full of art. It's going to take too long now, maybe for the next time. But, you know, our mission's actually to kind of integrate technology with natural, like, human way of living. We don't like the whole when you go outside, everyone's staring into a little tiny box kind of thing. And I know we don't really picture like people wearing giant glasses outside all the time either. It's going to be a lot more seamless and invisible, I think. In 100 years, I don't work in AI specifically. AI shows up in my work occasionally along with other emerging technologies, but spatial computing is entangled with it. I'd like to have a harmonious existence with AI that we can become symbiotic, and they have essentially aided us from completely obliterating ourselves and helped us kind of restore the planet to like a balanced way and help us maintain our cities and our ecosystem, and we kind of keep each other alive. And then we would explore the stars together.
Right. Well, people get AI really mixed up, right? Like, I think when people are talking about AI, they don't really know what AI is. And I don't want to make out that like I'm an expert or anything, but I did do a whole bunch of numerical methods and like future projection calculus in environmental engineering. And the AI programs are basically just that. They're like helping you do future projections of data, of basically predicting, you know, you've got the numbers where we are now and making that easier. So that's a perfect fit for like environment and smart cities and magically defying things that you were mentioning before about simulations. Well, if all these people do that, then these neural nets and these learning algorithms, whatever you call them, the platforms that are out now, can really help us get to that place.
Yeah, I'm, envisioning AI integrated with spatial computing, and it's integrated into the cities and all the objects that we interact with, and you can choose the best decision out of like all the computational results that the AI can help you make decisions based off of that, because we need them to run the simulations. They can run thousands of simulations for each like decision that you can make.
Instead of like robots taking over, it would be like, what happens if we cover everything with concrete? What happens if we don't get rid of cars? What happens if we, don't in plastic or put more trees on? And then it would show you all of the environmental data. And then you could see it through the goggles. You'd be like, whoa.
Yeah, I'm also a fan of like reskinning your world and seeing different scenarios play out and things like that too, for fun and also for science.
I did this little like mock-up once. I called it like Greentopia, where you could just walk down the street and see like green roofs and plants like coming off everything. Could that be done with Imagine? Could you walk down the street and just have it like exploding with life?
You could. You could. You wouldn't be able to see it very well during the daytime, but if you do it around sunset, you could mesh your environment and then deploy some digital green life and then see.
Can you explain how that works in terms of the three-dimensional bodies of like the buildings? Is it done through like a motion sensor on the device that can tell like how far away something is and then makes a three-dimensional model on top of that if you're like walking down the street? Or do you have to like already have a 3D map box based system already there?
Yeah, that would be later, if we integrate a map backend like Google Mapbox. I think you could get there. Right now, we're relying on the externally facing cameras, and it's going to scan and map your environment. You can either pre-scan or it'll do it on the fly depending on which app that you're running, but that's how it does. And there's a certain distance that you need to be. So, if I'm going to a large space, I have to actually walk around and scan like all the surfaces, and then it'll save that map, the environmental data, and then I'll be able to place content on surfaces.
Oh, cool. And how far away does it go? Like how in the distance can it do that?
I think I can mesh my entire office from sitting down. This is probably around the comfortable dimensions, maybe a little bit bigger.
In the future, will you be able to do like a bigger building? Like could I stand on the street and look at an office building and do that?
Yeah, right now I think you only get just the bottom part of it. You actually need to get up there. I think in the future we'll be relying on world scan data.
What's world scan data?
Like in the smart city sector, they're putting up sensors, and like Google Maps, there's actually continuous like mapping of the streets, so the information is as up to date as possible and accurate. So we envision that kind of future where it's updated so frequently, it's essentially real-time data, and then you can feed that into spatial computing, and then you'll be able to get the whole information about the building at that point.
Right. How close is the Magic Leap machine or the computer that goes with it? Is it strong enough to keep processing that, to keep calling those data and keep updating it? I mean, hopefully it shouldn't take too much data or too much processing power to do that.
Yeah, we haven't done it at that large scale, so hard to say, but basically all the information will be, stored in the cloud, and we'll have to run some tests when we move from like the tabletop applications to the outdoor ones.
Like what's the hardest thing about making this work? Like what are the challenges that you run into in trying to build this?
Just the building of it, or like the entire project?
Yeah, kind of the entire, it's always just interesting to hear what people say. I mean, I'm interested in, just the overall project, but also in each specific data feed. They always have their own complications. Like, like you'll have this issue with air and then that issue with water, and like who makes them and where they come from, and
like data sources. And then I think the bulk of the challenge comes from optimizing the content. Like we're talking large amounts of data, and it's happening in real time, and it's being rendered, pretty high quality. So there's like tons of graphical computational optimization that needed to be done to get this smart city to even run, and baby steps. And then the larger challenge that ails me is kind of the speed at which we're moving. Like I think, I'm trying to tackle kind of ambitious things with smart cities and sustainability and climate change, but it's like it takes a lot of effort to explain spatial computing to the world. What is it? Its capabilities, what's its value. You have to get people on board, you have to make demos, you have to show demos, and you need capital to build and develop apps and deploy solutions. You have to talk to a lot of people, and it takes a lot of time to solve these problems that I'm interested. So I'm concerned with the speed that we're able to move.
Yeah, but I mean, you're doing something that's pretty futuristic. So you're paving the way for all the, people that will come after you.
This is the fun part about being in like R&D labs, right? Nothing works. So we're like constantly trying to hack and get ahead of things and just try while running lots of tests.
Well, one thing I think is really cool about doing something that is this kind of glamorous and futuristic is that I think it's so exciting to people that it's really motivating to do all of the computer science back end of getting those real-time data feeds. So like when I first started getting into this space was maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, when I realized I couldn't get any data feeds anywhere to do anything I wanted to do. I was like, whoa, the environment. If you like learning computer programming, you can get feeds of all these different data things, whatever you want, there's like an API for it. And then I came to like environment and I was like, oh my God, there's like nothing. Now, like what Natalie has is Meter Leader project, and they have use the PG&E API, but PG&E is really advanced. A lot of other electricity utilities don't have the electricity API that you can get people's real-time data from. So I would like to people see the work that you're doing and they're like, wow, this is really amazing. We totally have to get all of like the forest cover data in a database, not in a spreadsheet that's downloadable. We need to make it proper APIs, proper like pull requests, have a regular like proper cron job on the server, updating it, like all these things that are kind of missing, that it inspires that whole like back end that is really kind of clunky and not there in a lot of stuff. Have you seen that happen? Have you seen people that you go to the EPA and you're like, your whole system sucks, can you please make it better so we can make this really fancy thing? I mean, have you seen that happen?
It has, but like on a much more severe example. I working with the United Nations, and I did a remote talk in Harare, Africa. The purpose of showing some of the work that Magic Leap did there was to urge them to build more infrastructure so they can have data. Like their data infrastructure is non-existent or very poor. They don't even have the satellite coverage. They're using like manual entry kind of information. So we're really trying to show them why it's important, because when we can take the data and use spatial computing to bring in visible information about like inequality and socioeconomic data, then we can actually start making an impact. Like you'll actually know what problems you have to solve. So it's kind of working back like 3 degrees, 3 steps. We learned that there's tons of places that just don't have any data at all. Like it's just dead space like on the planet.
So what happened with that? You said it was something more dramatic. Did something dramatic happen with that African project?
Well, we're gonna keep working with them since they're connected through the United Nations Development Program. So, I hope that we'll be able to continue meeting with them and urging them to build infrastructure. That was a step 1, is kind of showing the value. It's in like the multi-step process of getting people on board, explaining what it is and why it's important. And lack of data is a huge problem.
Well, I think, you can basically like mock up concepts in Unity and the Magic Leap experience without the data, or just using like fake data to show people what's possible. I mean, I'd like to see that, like, oh, this is like, air pollution. Do you know that air pollution is different from street corner to street corner? Or this is the carbon intensity of buildings, or thermal, like you had that thermal one there. Once you see it, you're just like, yeah, I'll fund that.
Yeah, I know people love the pictures, right? So we draw nice pictures and then make people want it. I'm like, all right, if you want the picture,
you're like, that'll be like $5 million, everybody. Yeah.
And then you need some sensors here, and you need really robust data back end.
I mean, that's what I do. I don't do the Magic Leap drawings because they're probably beyond my skill set. I'm like still in the 2D skill set. But all the stuff I design, people are always like, doesn't this stuff exist really? And I'm like, no, I just make it up, and I just hope that one day somebody will make it happen. But I think Magic Leap can be very powerful. So I'd like to see more of these, even just like mock-ups to help motivate people to fund, the back end. And you can always have like a browser version and an app version if people don't have the glasses, right?
Yeah, there's actually a couple data visualization companies that they have a tool that you can import an Excel or or CSV file, and then it makes like a spatial graph, and then you can see it on the headset, or you can go to browser. So you can do it both ways, or on your phone too. Just go to the URL on your phone, so you can see it in multiple different ways. They're called Flow.
Because if you've got like a Unity project, can't you just like export it? I mean, I haven't really used it much. Can you just export like, here's a browser version, here's a Magic Leap version, like here's a iPhone version?
Yeah, if you're using Unity, you can just make an executable for your web phone, and you make an MPK for the Magic Leap. You just deploy, just connect it to your computer and deploy.
Yeah, I've got to learn how to use it. It looks really fun. I've got so many ideas that I want to do, but I always want to do like all the things.
I know, me too. All the things.
All the things. But where's Magic Leap at right now? Like these fancy glasses. Not many people in like usually like urban planning and architecture are kind of a bit technology forward. And I think a lot of them would have never have heard of it. Like how close are we to actually having people have the glasses? And are they ever going to be like a consumer product, or is it only ever going to be something that you get in like museums and maybe universities and stuff?
It's both, we just launched it last year, so we're starting with partners like in educational space, museums. I worked in both of those. Consumer will naturally come through maturity of the technology. We have a few schools, museums, and government entities purchasing some of these bulk, and we're hoping to use some of them for pilots, so we can actually see the use cases in action and make the appropriate product adjustments and then optimize. That's what we're doing with the United Nations this year.
So are there any like real life examples where you can go out and you can buy, because the glasses are just like developer class now, aren't they?
Yeah, it's a creator's kit, so you have to go to Magic Leap website, you can buy it there. We do have the partners with the AT&T, so there's a few AT&T stores that have Magic Leaps where you can try it. I think we're making a push for location based experiences. That's actually the ideal way to try new XR technology. VR is doing it very well right now, so I think that's like a good strategy to exposing it.
So is it going to be a little bit like the next sort of Nintendo, like you get one and buy the like special thing and then wear it around, kind of play with it? Like what's the vision for how it will be in the next, I don't know, like 5 years or whatever, when it reached past its creative version to the next thing?
That's the cool thing about spatial computing, is that it applies to all sectors. So, we made our enterprise push right before the holidays. So we're targeting like manufacturing and governments and tools. And we have education, and we have a whole healthcare department at Magic Leap too. So we're kind of going through multiple channels at once. What
about like that Autodesk type of software? Is there a role for Magic Leap in like architectural drawing and machine design engineering?
Yeah, that's included as part of our kind of push for enterprise, is that people who work with CAD models and BIM files and more like urban planning and architecture can use that at their desk. So that's part of the vision too. Of course, game development. Anyone who uses anything to do with 3D models, this is a very great tool.
And I suppose Autodesk wouldn't launch a competitor, would they? Because that would be like them launching their own computer. They just make the software.
Yeah, I believe so.
Hardware.
Not entirely sure, but yeah, I think we would integrate with them. Right, we would make a spatial version of that working on the hardware.
Well, it would be cool. It would be totally amazing if, I just like to see all of the different environmental data, like thermal data, water, air, electricity, carbon intensity of all of the power plants and the grid. But like all of this was just available. So anybody could just make this stuff and they could just like tap into it. Is there one particular like data set that was particularly easy to use that you liked and you were like, oh, this is set up really nicely? Okay, this is my last question. What your favorite data set? And then we're going to move to questions.
Favorite data set? They were all equally difficult, but I did appreciate the traffic one, because we use Los Angeles and then we use live traffic, right? So it's like, can confirm accurate, go outside and drive around and see when the traffic jams are happening.
Oh, and that comes from Google, doesn't it? Isn't that from everybody's accelerometer in their phones that Google puts together?
Oh, the traffic? No, it's actually from one of the open data sources. That's an interesting note. I think the one that excites me the most, we haven't done this yet, is CO2 emissions. That's the one I have my eye on, because it's invisible and it will leverage sensors. There's probably databases where we have that data right now, And then, we can maybe even start doing that in where I am in LA or some other city that has good infrastructure. That's the one I hope to use.
Well, we should talk about that another time with these energy lollipops I've been trying to do with the carbon intensity of the grid that fluctuates so much through the day. There could be something interesting there. That would be a really cool thing to model. Okay, moving to questions.
I'm reading the question about Ready Player One. Yeah, I don't want that world where you like plug in, go into headset and disappear, and then the whole world is just like crumbling in the background.
I just saw the movie Ready Player where everyone is plugged into their video game headset, so life is miserable. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want that. I think I was drawn to AR, not VR, because I like the transparency of it. Like, I like that you can have people wearing headsets and then, you're interacting with the same thing together. And, even if you have, like, you go outside and people are wearing weird glasses, I think it's going to be very different. I think there should be a goal that everyone is in the same space together, and then you're seeing the same physical environment together.
It's like the picture you've got up here. It's like a sort of a communal vision. But the thing is, Natalie, the magic leap is like you're completely in the real world. It doesn't block you off from the real world. It more superimposes on top of the real world. So it's really interesting like that.
We have the problem with the phone thing, right? Because the phone technically doesn't make you disappear, but everyone's distracted. So I think about that a lot too, in the future when everybody's wearing like AR contacts or something like that, and people are multitasking. They're doing like 15 things and messaging like all their friends at the same time while they're having dinner with someone. That's going to be something I think we're going to have to solve. I think there's just like a natural tendency for people to want to multitask, to want to be productive all the time and stay connected. So I think that's like a human problem that we need to be mindful of as we continue using these like emerging technologies.
Yeah, and when like I tried Paul's Magic Leap, he made this kind of cute little kind of experience. There was something that was genuinely magical about it. Like I remember just being like, wow, I could kind of like made me feel different afterwards, that I was like, oh, I could live in a whole other universe. So it was quite beautiful, but I think it could have a dark side where you could just always want to live in what you call like the magic verse. You could be like walk into your home and then it's got like clouds and bubbles and like 3D cats, and then you take it off and you're like, okay, the world really sucks. The world is completely crap without like all my like clouds and bubbles and little like three-dimensional rainbows everywhere. I mean, I could imagine it getting like that, especially if a child goes up with it and you're like, ugh, God, it's just normal beach with nothing.
You guys read Rainbow's End by Werner Vinge? It's a science fiction novel. It takes place in a world where you have like AR is integrated, everyone's getting contacts, people are staring off into the ether, like doing computations, and they're like, reskinning their world in real time, whatever suits them for fun and stuff like that. So it's like kind of in the middle. It's not quite dystopian. This is very interesting. It's a lot of like visual load to deal with.
Yeah, I can see it going like that.
Like immersion kind of takes many forms, right? Because you can get obsessed with books too. Like before we even had computers or anything. Like I like the world in the book, so I'm just going to be reading constantly and disconnect myself. So it's like whatever the next thing is, I think that's still going to be kind of present.
Yeah, that's interesting too. We can't always blame the technology. I mean, people can be unhealthy and crazy in all, not to say that reading books is unhealthy and crazy, but there's lots of like pre-technology crazy when people try and blame, iPhones and social media addiction. They're like, everyone's on the stuff. And I'm just like, yeah, but like when I was growing up before the internet, people were just like getting wasted and like drink driving and stealing cars. And like, I mean, like, it wasn't like that was much better, like
it's just replacing whatever that human thing is, right?
Someone's like, I'm not going to steal a car, I'm just going to look at Instagram.
You're going to indulge yourself in something.
Yeah, people are always going to do dumb things. Okay, what's the next one from Nelson Gomez? What's the average time for product feature development under your team? I technically work for a gaming studio, giving out products also in AR, but I'm curious if there are things your team has managed to streamline as you guys modeled things into Magic Leap. Moreover, in a completely different train of thought, what were the challenges you faced while dealing with government entities?
So this particular smart city prototype took about 3 months. And I think that's kind of the average. We've made a bunch of things. In our lab, we've focused more on like high fidelity, realistic, photorealistic content and not game assets. So I think we averaged around 3 months. And that's like a full-blown team. We usually work with a external development studio, and they have a full team with designers, artists, and engineers. It's probably a team size of 10, I think, on average. And we definitely learned, a lot from doing one of these. Now that we've done one digital twin project, when we updated it, it became much easier to do. We created a pipeline for Mapbox integration, how to take the gray layout from Mapbox and model buildings. Like we have a process now, tips and tricks to optimizing high fidelity content for our hardware. So, and then challenges with government entities. I think that goes into the making sure you're explaining the value to governments. It's true. I think Katie said, they're using a little bit older processes and technologies. So this is kind of a big jump for them. We're going from audio phone calls, and we're talking about doing like volumetric calls, and so they all want the latest and greatest, but to kind of like walk them through what it is, what the value is, and getting them on board. It's a lot of effort, and they have no idea what it takes to make spatial content either. They're not versed in content development. They don't come from games or film or anything. So they said, I want that smart city tool. Will it take to build that for us? And it's usually a lot more than they expect.
Yeah, I think it's a real shame how there's such a division with people that work in like, computer programmers, hackers, game designers, said film, like all of these kind of creative technical crafts don't seep into sustainability much. Like you very rarely meet someone who's across both, and the people in sustainability tend to keep completely out of that. Like I just feel like they're so far apart, and I want to bring them together more, get each one interested in the other,
I think the bridge is actually museum space. It's like the cross between experience and education, and that's kind of like the in-between place. So if you can make something compelling that's educational, then you can take the next step and then take educational or functionality to spaces like governments.
I mean, it's also crazy. Like it takes so long to learn computer science or any kind of creative technical craft, and it takes so long to learn sustainability too. Like it gets so detailed in the science and everything. So it's very hard for anyone to even I feel like master kind of the two domains. Even if you are really serious about it.
It's tricky.
Okay, who's next? Nelson's got a second part to his question. Given the implementation, any leaner methods has done to sell the social and environmental change without having to go through AR tech?
We start with asking, what problem you're trying to solve. And then, we try to see if spatial computing can solve that. And sometimes spatial computing is not required. All they need is, better techniques. You can do it with the web, for example, or it's actually like a people problem, right? It's not a spatial computing problem for social and environmental change. For example, if we want to change the mind, if we want to build more empathy for someone to change policy for an environmental problem, you might be able to get away with just making a short film and not have to go through the AR, although the AR part would be cool, but
Yeah, but I think there's always that if you're kind of like a technophilic person, to always want to do the fanciest thing you can.
yeah.
And like a little example of like this, I wanted to make this like big outdoor, like spherical. I thought I'm going to make a giant spherical light that changes color based on and you can get them. I've seen there's LEDs like in a sphere, and it will put it out like a public artwork, and it will show the CO2 of the grid. And I showed it to a few people, and it was like, why don't you just show someone on like a browser? Like, why does it have to be this big fancy screen? And I was like, no, I was going to look at a browser, and then I thought about it a little more, and I thought, how reductive can I make it? And then I thought, Chrome extension. Like nothing gets simpler. If I want to do the simplest version of this. And then I was like, Chrome extension. That's it. Like that's like Twitter bot. Like you got to start little,
Yes, part small.
But I just think that idea of like just constantly trying to reduce the technology, like to the simplest version of what it is, and then maybe building up the layers afterwards. Like all of these spatial computing models can also possibly be very simple versions before they become the fancy version.
That's why I think we're kind of evolving away from the climate sim tool thing, because I think we're done with the whole sea level rise. Same thing we can see on the website, and it's like the same result. So instead, we're trying to think of unique ways to apply spatial to like impact, or leveraging like the volumetrically streamed phone calls, get that to a level of maturity that it's actually preferred or becomes an alternative to flying in person. So that's actually a really good example of something only spatial computing can do, right?
Is that where you like talk to like a real 3D person?
Yeah, it's like a holographic
Like that,
stream.
like what was that scene in Silicon Valley with the guy who was like trying to do it and then it froze with his mouth? Like, I don't know if anyone remembers that. We've got a few questions to get through. We've got one from David Thornby. I was involved in a spatial storytelling app a few years ago where users had to move around the city to access new pieces of the story. And the stories used the spaces in the city as part of a narrative. I'm thinking now of stories as educational narratives that use live spatial data via Magic Leap somehow. Any thoughts of doing this sort of thing?
So you're actually walking down streets, right? And then you're kind of unlocking like the next step in the story. Is that like using spaces in the city? Yeah, we've thought about that too. That's actually a kind of like a compelling way to put a policymaker into a headset and then have them walk around like the city of New York or something, and then you can actually tell the story of disaster, overcoming disaster, and getting to the future that you want to. And that's actually really a cool idea that's going to bring a lot of value. It hasn't been done yet too.
Is that kind of like that Pokemon game, but for like cities or smart cities?
It's been asked a lot, especially with the film and artistic spaces, like how to do the next evolution of storytelling in the physical world using spatial. It's like a uncracked nut still. I think some of those VR location-based experiences are starting to do that, like the Void and things where you go to a location and then they have a physical space like mapped one-to-one with what you're seeing on the VR headset. So if you're doing the Star Wars one and you reach out your hand to the digital R2D2, you will feel like a metallic thing on your hand. The AR version of that. I think they built it, manually, like one-on-one. They built the space and then they or maybe they built the content first and then they made the space exactly like it. And you're not supposed to take the VR headset off while you're in there. Like you're supposed to get in there. If you take it off, it's just like all solid color, like blocks and shapes and things.
Right. Oh, I see. So they match them up. They have like a block color and then they match the augmented thing on top of the thing. So it's like, seems real.
This is VR still, by the way, so you're cut off from the physical world. There's a door, and so you reach out and touch it, and then you touch the door. There's a chair, and then you sit in it, and you're like, oh, there's actually a thing there to sit on.
That's cool. Where is that? Where was it done?
I did it in Florida. It was at the Disney World parks, I think. They have one in New York, too. I think they're popping up everywhere. The Void.
Okay, we should get to Ben's question. Thinking about the nosedive episode of Black Mirror, which I haven't seen. We all know the carbon intensity footprint of our life. Could Magic Leap help us show each other our carbon footprint, and we could all see each other's progress bar to see how we are tracking in terms of reducing it, making this data visible may be useful to encourage. You're thinking like a true environmental game designer.
In a public leaderboard, right?
Yeah.
Like in Ready Player One, it's like the top person that's reducing the emissions.
Yeah. What do you think, Naomi? Could we do something like that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what I was thinking with the ambition of using the CO2 emissions data, for a particular area, and then challenging people to plant trees or, doing something to affect that in a positive way, and then celebrating people's accomplishments through rewards, and that would work, right? Like combining.
Would it be like attached to you? You would have all these like stars. You'd see somebody and they would have like
it's like hovering above your head, like
they'd have all these clouds. But then
I'm fourth place on this block.
Yeah, but one thing I've noticed though is if you don't have the environmental footprint made mandatory, kind of like the nutritional labeling, you're only going to get a small amount of people being interested in it, kind of like green building certifications and stuff. The stuff when it really works is when the government says, like what are they called? Like those star ratings on appliances. Like everybody has to have it. So even the worst players, they can't get out of it. And that kind of pushes everybody. But the problem with when things are voluntary is that you'll get like a group of enthusiasts, but I'm not sure if the group of enthusiasts are perhaps really going to trickle out. It'll do some change, but I don't know if it's going to like really push, like, okay, we cut, like 10 or 20% of a whole industry down. I'm not sure if it ever has that power, but it could be like a stepping stone.
Yeah, if only like a city would be like, all right, we're starting the official 2020 like carbon emission reduction competition for the whole city, and everyone is part of it, and you're using like XR and data viz for it.
I mean, it could be cool. I mean, everybody's psyched now. Greta Thunberg's got everyone's attention. So there's also a question here from David about the Google Glass backlash. What do you think of the dark side?
I think there's going to be a little weirdness when people start wearing these things outside. I don't think they're going to wear this outside. I think it's going to be, a couple generations of what that is. It's probably going to look like regular glasses. I also own a pair of the Snapchat glasses, which is, stylish looking glasses, but you have these two cameras on there. And then when you record, it has this spinning like orange thing to let everybody know that you're recording. And I wore it to like music festivals and things because I really just didn't want to be that guy holding the phone like at the concert. So, I didn't get any negativity around that. It was interesting. It was kind of like a social experiment. It was surprising. I think some of the dark sides of ubiquitous AR glasses or contacts is that people multitasking when they're trying to interact with their loved ones and things. That's what I worry about the most, right? Like you're running searches and looking up things and you're working and stuff, and now you can't get called out because they can't see what you're seeing. At least now, if your spouse is like on the phone during dinner, you know that they're distracted, but we're going to be going into a world where you won't know what people are doing in those classes. Compel people not to do that somehow. We have to give them something better than distractions. This is an example of like you're taking a class in sustainable development, right? And then, but you don't have to go. You can stay where you are and beam in.
I see. Oh yeah, I see that. Right, you've got both of the things going on.
Yeah, and then you can take classes and feel. It's almost like nothing's gonna ever replace the physical one-on-one, but I want to get it to the point where it's a good alternative.
Cool. Yeah, that looks amazing. I think that would be completely wonderful if we could make it exist somehow for people.
Yeah, I'm happy to connect on like Twitter or LinkedIn too.
Yes, she's Giant Space Turtle.
I'm Giant Space Turtle.
Giant Space Turtle. Did you get that from American Indian thing? I was in Canada over, sorry, I meant to say Native American, right? I was in Canada and there was a thing that talked about like Indigenous people that said that the Earth was like a story that was actually like a giant space floating turtle.
It's similar.
Is that where it comes from?
Mine comes from a math thing. It's called Turtles All the Way Down. It's supposed to be like a astrophysics philosophical concept. I guess there's actually a wiki article if you look up Turtles All the Way Down.
I will look at
turtles
it. But
stacked on top of turtles. It's big worlds stacked onto worlds, and it's implying that the universe is infinite and all that.
Oh, that's cool.
So giant space turtle is implying that it's a turtle with many worlds on its back and
well, the thing I got was not that at all. It was like the Indigenous people thought that the whole Earth was like a turtle with a shell, kind of like the mountains are a shell that just floats through space. So it's coming from all different places. But anyway, let's finish up.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
That was so cool to hear about what she's been doing with Magic Leap's technology. She's not working at Magic Leap anymore since they downsized, but you can find Naomi at Twitter at GST_Naomi and at her website, naomiaugustine.com. I'm going to be doing more episodes about the power of imagination and these ecotopia, imagination-centric experiences, so keep a lookout for that. There are some really cool academic studies coming out about the power of imagining solutions, and they don't have a Magic Leap device to help, so that could be a really exciting opportunity to do something cool. Please share the episode with anyone you know who designs environmental change programs or projects or startups. We can get so much more creative and technically advanced about the way we make change happen, and fun. Changing the world should be fun. Magic Leap is a super fun way of promoting change in a way that is more than just education. Digital twins of feedback loops and imagining a different type of future are way more powerful than just promoting regular education in a 3D form. There's so much potential here. Make sure you check out the blog article and the Instagram video that go along with this episode, and please like, comment and share everything. It really helps. And please consider supporting the podcast on Patreon. If you can chip in $5, $10 or $25, that'd be awesome. And don't forget to sign up to my website, katiepatrick.com. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn. I'm posting ideas and thoughts and research and tutorials all the time. And if you haven't already, grab a copy of my book, How to Save the World. That is on Amazon, Audible or Indiegogo. And thank you for listening. I will see you next month.